Hello, everyone. This is Liam from Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host, Liam, aka Hambar, and today I'm going to talk about another, it is a medieval work that I read, another Arthurian work that I read. And specifically, though, it is part of the Parzival readings I wanted to do. That was really a quest I had set for myself last year, I should say, and I did not really do a great job on it. I did read the first part of my of the quest, but only the first part. And now I'm getting to the second part, so let's get into that. So that quest, of course, began with Percival, the story of the Grail by Chrétien de Troyes. And I really enjoyed this. I think that Burton Raffle did a really good job translating it into verse, made it very fun and easy to read. But of course, it's incomplete. Chrétien would have passed away, passed away before it was finished. And then the second part of this quest is Parzival. Looks like Parzival by Wolfram von Eschenbach. So another one that has an author we know of. This would have been written in the early 13th century, not super long after Chrétien's Percival romance, and it is a continuation of it. It finishes it, but it is also kind of its own thing, and it's in part a retelling. You get a lot more characters that have names, for example. It also has sort of a prologue that is not in Chrétien's version, right? So you have the story of Percival's father, actually, because in Chrétien's version, we're really not sure who Percival really is. Yeah, he has a mother, and we don't really know anything about her either. So we learn some of these things they are here in this version, which I did enjoy. Now, the thing with what I read here, I had the Penguin Classics version, which is translated by A.T. Hato. But I also read another version. It just depended on what timing I was reading this at, and I read Helen and Mustard and Charles E. Passage's translation as well. I actually enjoyed Mustard and Passage's a bit more. I found it a bit more engaging. Maybe it flowed a bit more. They both have good supplementary material. There's a little forward, I believe is what it is here. Yeah, there's a forward in the Hato version. And then there is kind of a guide it's an introduction to a second reading. And it's all good information. The Mustard and Passage version, which I don't have physically, has a very long introduction and goes over a lot of the scholarship, which if you wanted to study the poem, really makes sense. If you want to just read the poem, it's a lot of information up front. I think it's fine. I think it's useful information and brings up some interesting stuff. Now, of course, also one of the things it brings up is that while Chrétien is obviously the main source for Parzival, I believe it's even mentioned in Christian is mentioned. That's what his name in Old French would have been. That there's also another character, another person, Quixote or Coyote or something like that, probably Quixote maybe, who is a Provençal apparently, who heard the story in the heathen tongue, which is just Arabic, right, and told it to Wolfram. And Wolfram he took it and he made this whole story, Parzival, for it, right? And Quixote is really not sure if this person's really ever existed. It would fit as a Provençal name if you just change it up a little bit. But it is interesting nonetheless. And there are some hints that maybe it does make sense that this would come from a Provençal source, mostly with like the kind of weather that's in consideration and like climate. So there's some interesting stuff though about this one. Well, I actually really like the prologue, the Gomeret stuff, the father of Parzival. It actually introduces a very interesting aspect of the poem. It is a poem, I should note. that even though I read these in prose translations, it is written in prosody, that it is a poem, it's written in verse. And I wish I had read it in verse. I'm not sure what English translation does it in verse. In fact, I think I even have here, yes, the opening lines. I'm going to butcher this. This is Middle High German. It is not a dialect that is like super related to modern High German. So, and I think W's would still be W's at this point in German. Ist Zwiebelherzen Nachgeber, das muss der Seller werden sur, is machet untergeseret, is swa sich pareret. So I don't know that really at all, and but you can definitely tell that it's written in verse, and you lose that in both these translations I read. So, and I think in a lot of ways because of that, maybe it was harder to read than Chrétien's. I found this one really easy to go through. This one, while also longer, of course, is just not as entertaining entirely the way through. Now, there are a couple other interesting aspects to this, besides that prelude, kind of with Percival's father, and he actually has a relationship with a Moorish woman, which is actually pretty progressive for the time. The Moors are really, I mean, they're called infidels, right? And but Gamurret is kind of seen. He seems to be somewhat inspired by Richard Lionheart. In fact, the whole family are called the Anjou. I think, yeah, they think they're called, Angevins maybe. Now I'm blanking all of a sudden. But their name is definitely related to the Angevins, which is interesting. But Gamurret definitely has this relationship where he is pretty much like, well, these Moors are not inherently evil or anything like that. They're just not Christians. And they even have a potential of being Christians, as we see with a character named Feyrefes, who is actually related to Parzival. It was interesting, and I appreciate it. I mean, again, it's very still much 13th century rather than a 21st century mindset, but more progressive than I would have thought. We also have, though, just like in Chrétien's, we have Gawain's story thrown into this. In fact, Gawain's story is broken up more, though, because the first time we get Gawain is a bit more of a new edition, and then we go back to Parzival, and then that's new, right? Because we never go back to Parzival in Chrétien. We stop in the middle of the Gawain episode, and then we go back to Gawain, and then a lot of stuff happens that we read about in Chrétien stuff. And then we kind of go back and forth a little bit, but we stick with the Gawain actually a good chunk of the poem, which is fine. I actually am a big fan of Gawain. I think Percival and Gawain are both very interesting characters, and I think just it's interesting because Gawain is still one of the best, right? Percival is like the best here, but what's interesting about Percival is that this is described as apparently as a romance of education, which literally built on this roman, right? A coming of age, right? Percival it's kind of funny at the start. Like, in fact, I think the start of this book might be my favorite part of it. Not just the Gamurret stuff, which is a nice addition, but it's just funny, right? It's kind of this like foolish stuff going on. And it's also when you get like most of the Arthurian stuff too, because the Percival stuff, especially the Grail stuff, is really kind of related to Arthuriana, but it's not strictly in like Arthur's court really all that much. So another thing also that is interesting though is the Grail itself. So it's definitely holy here. It's not really holy. We don't get a lot of information at all about it in Chrétien's story. It does seem obvious that it is a dish of some sort, like a platter probably, in Chrétien's stuff, but we don't really get much information on it. Here it's a stone, which is a very interesting interpretation. It does have some magical properties, and it is still the focus of the story. In fact, it is very lovely focus how we get this stone, this Grail near the beginning with the Fisher King, and then you come back to it, right? And it gets us this conclusion that is very like chivalric, very peaceful, but also ties in with this idea of like this courtly love, the love that is on display here, I think, is really well done. I mean, it's a little erotic at times. It is a romance. I think it's really well done, though. And I think Wolfram does a fantastic job portraying love, and also portraying just like Christ-like attitudes in a way, which is kind of surprising. He does leave out like peasants. He leaves out clergy. Right, it's very much focused on lords and ladies and knights, and he kind of has like nods to um, low, like not super rich knights, because that's what Wolfram himself was. And he also makes references to a lot of German literature. The versions I read have these references and footnotes. But it's funny also to see Wolfram's character come out in this. Chrétien always came off as a witty guy, and he was very good at his poetry. Wolfram as well, but he also like at points is like very much like you can very much get his personality through the text, and it's very fun, right? And sometimes it even has like asides, right? It's just straight up just like saying things, and it's just the author talking. It's not really all that much about the story. But it is a fun coming of age with an interesting take on the Grail. It does have some interesting geography going on, like Britain and Brittany are pretty much one and the same in this case. Arthur's court is at Nantes, in Brittany, and there is no channel. There's no English channel, right? I mean, like a lot of the story should be taking place in Wales, right? But there is no mention of water, really. So, but it's a very fun. I'm glad I read it. It's interesting how different these are, right? And I really like reading medieval texts. It feels a lot like a novel, or reads a lot like a novel. Now that is because I'm reading in prose. If I read it in verse, it would not feel so much like a novel. But I still think it would retain a lot of that feeling. That these are pretty advanced books in a lot of ways, and I very much enjoyed reading it. Next on my Percival Quest, part 3 of 3, is the High Book of the Grail, also called Perilous Vows, by an unknown author. And that is the next big one. I think I should be able to get to this year pretty easily. It is shorter than Parzival, but also considered like the most out there of them, like very different compared to all the other continuations of Percival. And there's a lot. I'm not going to read all of them. I am interested in these 3 mostly, but I'm also interested in reading some other ones to supplement these. So the other 2 I'm thinking about, especially, and I think they're both pretty short actually as well too. So I want to read the Peredur, son of York, or whatever the Welsh name for it is. Peredur is a Welsh version of the romance that came out after Chrétien's version, though, so it still seems like it's mostly based off Chrétien's. And I also want to read Percival of Gallus, I think is what it's called. It's Middle English. It's like really the only Middle English Percival romance, as far as I'm aware. It's very different. Doesn't have the Grail. It seems to focus more on that beginning, like kind of like comedy type of stuff. In fact, this is when Chaucer at one point in the Canterbury Tales says the knight drank from wells like Sir Percival. He's referencing this Middle English romance, and so it goes very different directions, and it's kind of getting into a comedic side of things. So I would like to read those. Another one that I would kind of want to supplement with would be the Percival Saga, which I haven't been able to find. I don't know where it is available, like in any way, whether it's just the original Icelandic online or whatnot. So I have no clue how long that one is. But anyways, some good reading. I like to supplement my Arthurian reading with the medieval works, right? I prefer to read them in the original language, but my Old French is not very good. Like for this, which is Old French, and this is Old French, and my Middle High German is pretty much non-existent. I would like to change that for sure by some point. So, anyways, let me know if you've read Parzival and what you thought of it. I very much enjoyed it, and in fact, I am tempted that at some point I'll probably read more of Wolfram von Eschenbach's stuff because he wrote more. So, anyways, leaving from Williams Lyceum. I'll catch you next time.